Hey, what's up everybody? This is Osterberg501 and today I want to go over some new information we got for spells in Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. And spells will be replacing grenades and grenade mods from other Borderlands games, so it will be equipable items that are not class specific. They will have their own rarities, their own stats, but they will be much more important to your build than grenade mods were, and they're going to have a lot more variety. And they're being designed as essentially being a slightly smaller version of your class abilities. But we do get some new, very interesting information for these spells in this article. So much like Borderlands guns, magic in Tiny Tina's Wonderlands comes from different manufacturers, each with its own focus. Conjura are the makers of simple cast spells, while Arkan makes channel cast magic. In other words, you can hold down the trigger and magic just spews everywhere. Weird Weaver makes repeating cast magic, and Miraculum specializes in self-cast magic. One example showed off was a spell that surrounds a player with a cryo bubble of protection, shielding the player from harm. So going through these manufacturers, Conjura are the makers of simple cast spells. I would expect these to be something like just a single fireball or a single frostbolt or something of that nature, at least at the base. Because as we know, getting up to legendary items in Borderlands, they kind of get pretty crazy and they don't necessarily follow their manufacturer's description. While Arkan makes channel cast magic, in other words, you hold down the trigger. So essentially this would be channeled spells. So maybe if they have some type of elemental breath, you'd be able to channel that and keep casting it. Maybe a big AoE effect that you cast it, you continue to channel it the longer you channel it. Obviously the more damage it's going to do. Maybe some type of lightning cone in front of you, stuff like that. Weird Weaver makes repeating cast magic. So what I'm assuming for this is that it's more of like a multi-casting or kind of a fully automatic casting, where say if you had Conjura and you had a fireball, it would just be a single fireball. But maybe if you had Weird Weaver, it would be like a burst of like 3 or 4 fireballs. The most likely would do less damage comparatively, but you would have a lot more projectiles being thrown out in a single cast. And I could definitely see this specific manufacturer getting kind of crazy when you get legendaries. I could see just a legendary that shoots out like 20 fireballs or something in super quick succession. Then finally we have Miraculum, and they specialize in self-cast magic. So this is going to be more focused on buffs, defensives, and probably support type casts. So they give the example of a cryo bubble that protects you from harm. So that would be shielding. They've already mentioned having heals before. So most likely big heals, maybe heals over time, maybe AoE heals, possibly buffing yourself up for damage increases, stuff of that nature. In addition to the different manufacturers and their strengths, Wonderland's magic system also has a lovely variety of spell payloads to bring down upon your many foes, including hawks, fireballs, ice spikes, hydras, meteors, protective circles, and ground fissures. The ground fissures have an especially satisfying effect as they tear through the terrain toward your target. The devs are calling these mini skills, like I've mentioned before, referring to Borderlands skill system. However, they're much faster to charge and can be changed out in the same way you trade out any other weapon in the Borderlands universe. Think Mordecai's Bloodwing, but faster, with more possible variety and highly boostable with stacking modifiers from your other items and attacks. So like I mentioned, they're being designed as mini spells that you can very much create your entire build around, and they're generally going to have much shorter cooldowns. So you're able to use these a lot, and I think a lot of people are probably going to be making builds focus on spells, especially off the start, because it's the new thing and there's clearly been a lot of work put into this to allow it to be the focal point of a lot of builds. In addition to the different kinds of spells and their different manufacturers, spells have their own effect. Shockish, which is an electric effect, cold, which shoots out frost, as well as fire, poison, and dark magic types. Each effect has its own sigil, which you can see in the hand of the character when the spell is cast. And we've seen that in some of the footage. You'll see different glyphs appearing on the player's hand when they're casting spells, and they made the player's hands a big part of casting these spells spells as we've seen in some of the gameplay and some of the trailers. So it feels much more like the magic is actually coming out of their hands instead of them just moving their hands and a spell appears and goes somewhere. So there are a lot of different parts to spells. So first off, you have the different spells themselves, such as hawks, fireballs, hydras, meteors. Then you have the different manufacturers that affect the basis of the spells. Then you have spells being actual items, so they have their own different rarities, they have their own different stats. Once you get up to legendary, they're going to have a bunch of crazy effects. And then they also have their own spell effects, or what are essentially different elemental types, so shock, cold, fire, poison, and dark magic. So mixing all of that together, there are going to be a ridiculous amount of variety and options for spells themselves. And keep in mind, this is just one part of gearing in Wonderlands. This is just the gearing slot that's replacing grenades. So you're going to have a ton of options just with this. Then you have your character builds that can also play into and help buff these spells just because of passive stats or damage increases. You have all of your other different gear pieces that can also give you additional stats, cooldown reduction, all that different type of stuff. And then you also have your guns, and I have a pretty big suspicion that there are definitely going to be guns that have some effects on them that buff or interact with your spell cast. And like I've mentioned before, the build variety and potential in Wonderlands is a thing I'm most excited for, and having spells be essentially a new major pillar of build creation is even going to add more variety and possibilities to the builds you can create. But that's pretty much all I want to go over for the new information we got on spells. So subscribe if you want to see more Wonderlands or other videos. Leave a like if you liked the video. Leave a comment down below what you guys think about spells for Wonderlands, and thanks for watching.